You are listening to the Ready PDM Network.
This episode is brought to you by Under 10 Consulting. For many organizations, it seems products get released by individual heroics. Yet most organizations need a small number of living documents, fewer than 10, to manage their products and services. Contact Under 10 for a product playbook designed specifically for your organization.
Are you ready?
Humor occurs when and only when three conditions are satisfied. A situation is a violation, the situation is benign, and both of those appraisals occur simultaneously. Violations are anything that threatens the way you believe the world ought to be. Simply put, something seems wrong. There's many ways to make a violation benign. We've studied three. One way you make a violation benign is to not be strongly committed to the violated norm.
I've always really enjoyed stand-up comedy and sort of, been entertained by it, but also sort of appreciated the craft. And I kind of wanted to try it, sort of one of those things, maybe someday, eventually I'll sort of get around to doing something like this.
This is Product Management. Welcome. We're here to learn from brilliant minds across numerous disciplines that fuel the modern product manager. Let's take a deep dive into user experience, innovation, design, development, metrics, and more. Do you want more product management tactics and research? Subscribe at thisisproductmanagement.com to receive the latest updates from this podcast.
Hey, I'm your host, Mike Fishbein. I blog about lean product management, have authored several books on customer development. This is Product Management, a podcast produced by Alpha UX.
A user interface is like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not that good.
What we set out to do really was to start building up a curriculum for the modern product manager. So we set to, cover specific aspects of the.
Your team is leading the charge to be more innovative within a large organization. You're building products users love. So generating customer feedback is your top priority. But it can take months to source target users, collaborate with designers to build prototypes, and work with researchers to set up tests and analyze results. So how can you generate meaningful insights from your target customers at every stage in the product lifecycle, right when you need it? Alpha UX enables product teams to do exactly that.
But finally, I think large companies are becoming more concerned with competition from startup.
You find out life's this game of inches. So is football. Because in either game, life or football, the margin for error is so small. I mean, 1/2 a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us. Hell yeah. They're in every break of the game, every minute, every second.
Only then to learn about what customers want, they've really started with what turned out to be the riskiest assumption of all, which was that customers actually want them.
The number one thing was timing. Timing accounted for 42% of the difference between success and failure. Team and execution came in second, and the idea, the differentiability of the idea, the uniqueness idea, that actually came in third.
Ask a question like, what are users' biggest pain points as it pertains to X, or which of these two is two propositions is more valuable?
A lot of people come to me and say, Steve, how can you be funny? I'm not trying to brag, I'm not trying to be a big shot, but I have the gift that all the great comedians have, and I'm talking about the one element that is crucial to all delivery of comedy material. I'm talking about, of course, timing. Timing.
To trust in the process and to have confidence that if you are doing the right things, that it'll ultimately work out.
humor, 6 dimensions of humor, and if I use at least 2 of them, I've got a joke. If I use 3 of them, it's probably going to be a really good joke, but that's not enough. There's still that, there's something about it, that X factor, that thing you can't put your finger on, that just makes your body move. It just moves your body.
Hello, Ready Product Radio heads, and welcome to another exciting episode of Ready Product Radio. This week we talk with Mike Fishbein, inbound marketer, author, and host of the excellent This is Product Management podcast. Mike talks about how doing stand-up comedy can be good for product professionals, about which topics have been most popular on his podcast, and how innovation isn't just for startups. Ready Product principle number 1 is delivering standout products like delivering stand-up comedy requires precise timing. Enjoy the show. Mike Fishbein, welcome to Ready Product Radio. I'm a big fan of your podcast, This is Product Management. But for those who might not know you, can you give us an introduction of yourself for our audience, please?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Alan. I do content marketing at a company called Alpha UX, an enterprise software company in New York. And as you mentioned, I host a podcast called This is Product Management.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I know I'm a big fan of the podcast. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are as well. So Mike, the Ready Product Radio podcast is all about helping product people of all kinds of disciplines be ready for the many challenges that will face them on their product journeys. When I looked at some of your posts online and your background, I thought the following 3 topics might be good for us. Number 1, why product people should do stand-up comedy. I saw you'd done a post on that topic. And then secondly, interested in what have been the most popular topics on your podcast, This is Product Management, and maybe your thoughts on why they're so popular. And then finally, corporate innovation. We hear so much about lean startups these days and how they innovate. But what about the product managers in large corporations? Do those 3 topics sound good to you?
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Okay, cool. So let's dive in with product managers doing stand-up comedy. I was really intrigued when I saw a blog post from you on that topic, and I've certainly got my own ideas of maybe why you think that's a good idea. But let's talk about that. Why did you think that product managers should be doing stand-up comedy?
Yeah, this was based on an experience I had, I guess about a year now. I've always really enjoyed stand-up comedy and sort of, been entertained by it, but also sort of appreciated the craft. And I kind of wanted to try it, sort of one of those things, maybe someday, eventually I'll sort of get around to doing something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had a friend who has actually done a lot of stand-up comedy and a lot of open mics. And she said, okay, we're going to do it, so-and-so week. And so I sort of accepted the challenge, and I think became stronger for it, learned a lot from it, and sort of was able to draw a number of parallels to product management.
Mm-hmm.
So sort of like I said, I was sort of forced into it sort of by a friend, and it sort of became an exercise in, as they like to say, sort of screw it, ship it. And sort of overcoming failure and just sort of learning by doing. So, like I said, it was kind of a someday maybe I'll do this. But sort of putting a hard deadline, it forced me to, rather than sort of wait for inspiration to, sort of go out and take it and sort of force myself to produce something.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately to, put it in front of, in this case, my audience. In the product manager's case, it may be the customers. And so what I did when I got out there is I, sort of quickly and, sort of strongly learned what works and what didn't, based on, either getting some laughs or hearing, basically dead silence.
Yeah, crickets.
Crickets, yeah. And I sort of, I think I was stronger for it. And I think, as a product manager, you have to really sort of put yourself out there a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And be able to, step out of yourself and out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely sounds like product management to me. So how long was your set or your session? How long were you up there for?
I think the cutoff time was like 7 minutes or 6 minutes, and I'm pretty sure I only went for 4 or 5 minutes.
And it probably felt like a lifetime.
Yeah, it sure did.
Yeah. Wow. I certainly admire you. I've never done stand up, but I did earlier in my career take the Toastmasters program because I wanted to become a better public speaker. So that's great. So why don't we talk next about your podcast? And maybe before my question I'm really interested in, Mike, is what the most popular topics have been. But maybe you can start by just giving us a background of why you did the podcast, how many episodes you've done, and what the general response has been. And then I'd like to hear about what you think the most popular topics have been.
Sure, yeah. So I think we sort of realized there was really sort of a lack of educational materials around product management. It's not necessarily something that's taught in colleges or schools. There are some blog posts here and there on the internet, but there aren't a ton of, sort of formalized training programs for it. And I think that's in part because it's a sort of a relatively new field of, digital product management. And so what we set out to do really was to start building up a curriculum for the modern product manager. So we set to, cover specific aspects of the role of product management, different disciplines the product manager needs, and just different aspects of the job that the product manager is going to be interacting with. And we would, get the people that we think are the absolute best to talk about given aspects of product management and do some interviews. So in terms of what's been the most popular, just sort of, looking back, we've done about 43 episodes, and sort of looking back at the analytics, I'd say one has been on demand validation with Stephen Cohn. Talked about some ways to get more reliable feedback from customers and to ultimately use that to increase the chances of building a successful product. We had Nir Ayal talking about user engagement, who's just a terrific speaker and storyteller and does a great job of explaining complex ideas. We did an episode actually on storytelling, which may not seem like something that is a discipline for product managers, but as our guest, who was terrific, Vala Vakili, who's now an entrepreneur in residence at City Ventures. The episode is really about how he communicates with internal stakeholders and with his team and with his users to ultimately just create great products. We've done episodes on experimentation, keeping up with technology, and a few others have been popular, but I think those first few have been the biggest.
Yeah, that's good. And how long you been doing the podcast now? Like, when did it start?
It's been close to a year. So we have 43 episodes, and we were doing once a week, and now we're at just recently switched to once every 2 weeks. So yeah.
That's awesome. So for those, I'm sure most of the listeners to this podcast would already be aware of it, but Mike, just for those who might not be, what's the URL for that?
This is productmanagement.com.
Yeah, pretty straightforward. Can't miss that. Good. Well, thanks for that list there, and I might chase some of those folks myself for my own podcast. Some pretty good talent that you've got there. Let's go on and talk about innovation at large corporations. Then, what a lot of people hear about these days is lean startup and innovation coming from the startup community. A lot of product managers, certainly here in Canada, and I imagine it's the same for you in the US, are not working for startups, and they're not working for small companies. We work for large corporations that may be quite mature, maybe quite bureaucratic, maybe a fairly business as usual type of culture. So I thought the third topic we could talk about, Mike, is what have you heard or seen yourself in terms of how product managers working at larger, more mature organizations can look at fostering innovation and looking for that next breakthrough product or product category. What are your thoughts in terms of innovation at large corporations?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely been a fascinating new trend. I think it's come about a lot. As you said, it's sort of innovation has been really coming from a lot of startups, sort of from the startup community. But finally, I think large companies are becoming, more concerned with competition from startups, as well as with how they, and so sort of how they can, maintain their existing market share, but also how they can grow and expand even beyond what they are, which is in many cases, multi-billion-dollar organizations with many different business units. And again, like you said, I think a lot of companies are trying to apply what's been so popular with startups, which has been methodologies such as lean and building MVPs and creating the right team and organizational structures to do that. But it's often not so simple. And it kind of requires, a different set of skills and strategies and tactics. And it's kind of a lot of what we've been trying to unearth on the podcast recently. And there are so many different pieces to the puzzle. I think, creating a good sort of organizational and team structure where product and innovation teams can have autonomy. And I think Jeremiah Zinn on our episode on incubation talked a lot about how his company has found a methodology for doing that and making that repeatable. I think before even getting there, it requires really dealing with a lot of different stakeholders within the organization, many of whom have different interests and incentives. And so we actually had somebody from News Corp on an episode about internal politics, and she gave some great advice about, again, how to get buy-in. And she talked about, I think the biggest thing that I learned from that was sort of having empathy and understanding what people's priorities are, whether it be the CFO or the CEO or the engineering team. So really, she suggested actually just sitting down with them for coffee outside of the office, so getting to know them, and so you can have more empathy for them to sort of get buy-in from some of these more innovative and sort of data-driven approaches.
Yeah, and imagine News Corp's a fairly large organization, so that's good stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Well, what? Any other thoughts on that topic, Mike? Before we move on,
understanding the opportunities and limitations in terms of gaining customer feedback. Customer feedback has been really at the core of some of these more modern product development methodologies, such as lean and agile. I think a lot of the reasons why products and startups and even established businesses were failing was for not building products that their customers actually want and need. And so what these methodologies do is they sort of start inverting the product lifecycle, which used to start with, business planning and market research and then development and then some marketing, only then to learn about what customers want. They've really started with what turned out to be the riskiest assumption of all, which was that customers actually want them. But I think it's important for product managers at large companies and innovation people to understand how to do that in the right way. I think, gaining behavioral data is a really important part of that, and seeing how, rather than just asking, hey, what do you want, but actually seeing how people behave, perhaps with an interactive prototype or even just a landing page, and as well as, gaining qualitative data. And not purely looking at the quantitative data, but also, again, gaining empathy for users to understand on a more qualitative level what it is that is important to them, and still continuing to just use creativity and best judgment to interpret that data rather than using it as an end all be all, but rather just using it as a starting point to drive forward.
Yeah, those are good ones, and I like that you recommend observational observing, target customers, and even that alone could probably be a topic in some large organizations. The sales organization wants to, basically protect the customer relationship. So even getting to see a customer in a large enough organization can be a challenge. So those are good topics. Mike, why don't we shift to this? I know that the podcast is supported or sponsored by Alpha UX. Is that am I saying that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah. So why don't we talk a bit about Alpha UX, because I've always wondered what it is. Are you in that company or a member of the team there, and what do you guys do in the space that would relate to product management?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a part of the team there, doing marketing. And basically, it's a platform for large companies to learn about their customers, to generate user insights throughout the product lifecycle. They have questions about their users. They want to learn about what their users want and what products and features they should be building. And so the platform makes it really easy for them to do that. They can, ask a question like, what are users' biggest pain points as it pertains to X, or which of these two is two propositions is more valuable? Where should this button go? Any number of things you could think of. And then within days, they can get feedback from their users. Yeah,
good. So, what do you know the history of the name Alpha UX? Because I wasn't sure whether it was like a wireframing tool, or what's the history of the name Alpha UX? Do you know?
The name has actually been a source of confusion and discussion recently.
Yeah.
And one of the original use cases was, and still is for product managers to help solve, some of their UX challenges.
Okay.
And some design aspects, but it's become a more broader platform.
Yeah, you've broadened beyond that. That makes sense. I'm always interested in the history of names. I'll give you a funny story. One of the companies I've worked with here in the Toronto area, their name was Soroc, SOROC, and if you looked at their little logo and talked to the founders, you'd realize that it was an anagram of the Coors brand of beer, and that their little logo was actually, that tab that you pull off of the can of beer. That's what they used for their logo. So that's probably the most humorous one I've heard of a company name. But that's good, Mike. So last question I always like to ask all of my guests is, as you said, there's not a lot of places where people can go to learn product management and whatnot. So last question I always ask is, now that you are where you are and you've learned what you've learned, if you were to go back 10 or 15 years, and talk to the younger Mike Fishbein, about product management, about business in general, what advice would you give yourself? Like, what do you think some of your key learnings have been, in the last 10, 15 years?
That's a great one. I think that I would say to trust in the process and to have confidence that if you are doing the right things, that it'll ultimately work out. And, if you're in product management and you're building new products or, continuing to develop existing products, you have to sort of use what you have at hand and the tools and assets and the insights that you have, to make the best decisions and to do your best to execute on those decisions. And sometimes that works out well, and other times it does not. But I think if you, again, follow the right process and do the right things and continue to just produce quality work, it all works out. So I think, just having the right process in place and just continuing to execute over time, and it goes from there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's good advice. So before I leave you here, Mike, if somebody's listening to this podcast and was intrigued about something specific you said, wanted to follow up with you or reach out and connect with you, what contact information are you comfortable sharing?
Sure. Well, the podcast website that we mentioned, you can sign up and reach out through there. This is productmanagement.com. And then probably the best place to reach out otherwise would be Twitter at mfishbein.
Okay. And I'll spell that too, just for folks that might not get that. So the M is fairly straightforward. It's Fishbein, Fishbein. Is that correct?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, thanks, Mike. I hope we can do this again sometime. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Thanks so much.
Today's podcast was brought to you by Under 10 Consulting. Get your product teams up to speed quickly with the latest methods and a proven process tailored to your organization. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ready Product Radio, part of the Ready PDM network. This is when most podcasters ask you to leave a review on iTunes if you like the show. My only request is if you found the show entertaining, inspiring, or informative, please share it with a colleague or friend who may feel the same way. Also, note that the views expressed in this episode do not necessarily reflect my views or the views of the Ready PDM network. If you want yourself or your product to be ready, then keep your eyes on your markets, your ears to your customers, your mind on their experiences, both good and bad, and finally, keep your hearts in your products. Until next time, thank you for listening. You can contact us on Twitter at Ready Product Radio. That's RDYPRODUCTRADIO. And on the web at www.readyproductradio.com.
Fishbein, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
In this episode, I'll be interviewing Nir Eyal, the author of Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products. Sarah Judd Welch, the founder of Loyal. Speaking with Will Cole from Stack Exchange. Speaking with Gail McDowell, author of Cracking the PM Interview. Tristan Cromer from Grasshopper Herder. Swapnil Parikh, Jack Cole, who is the director of design in an awesome UX agency called Motivate Design. Justin Hendricks, the executive director of NYC Media Lab. We've got Vala Vakali, a digital media product leader at iHeartRadio, formerly Yahoo, to tell some great product management stories. Stephen O'Keefe, the customer success manager of HubSpot. With Chad McAllister, the host of the Everyday Innovator podcast. Speaking with Mona Patel, the founder and CEO of Motivate Design and the author of Reframe. Speaking with Nadav Ben-Barak, the head of product marketing at Okta. Speaking with Josh Wexler, the director of solutions at Originate. Speaking with Max Galka, the founder of Metrocosm and Revaluate. With Jason Schwartz, the product owner of Conversion at Spotify. Speaking with Tim Falls, the vice president of community at Keen.io. With Maggie Jan, a data scientist at Keen.io. Ben Foster, who advises a number of startups on product strategy, design, organization, and hiring. Michael Bamberger, the co-founder of Alpha UX, and with Scott Pollock, head of business development at SumAll. Nira Musalam and Tim Lawton from Frontier 7. With Scarlett Sieber, the senior vice president of open innovation at BBVA. Kevin DeWalt, an entrepreneur and angel investor. And with Carrie Davis, formerly the global director of innovation and entrepreneurship at Coca-Cola. And with Helen Alschuler, the CTO of the fintech startup PeerIQ. And with Helen Bowie, the founder of Stash It and the former head of innovation management at News Corp. With Jeremiah Zinn, the chief product officer at Bark & Co. Speaking with Sarah Duty, a user experience designer and product strategist. Brant Cooper, who's the New York Times bestselling author of The Lean Entrepreneur and the founder of Moves the Needle. And with Rebecca Hamilton, a professor at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business and the author of a recently published article in the Harvard Business Review called Bridging Psychological Distance. With Vivek Bedi, who just joined LearnVest as the head of product management after leading product at Sterling Backcheck. Speaking with Mark Serkin, formerly a director at PwC and now the chief marketing officer at SpendBoss. Deli FT, the CEO of Close.io. Jeremy Horn, maybe better known as the product guy. Speaking with Richard Banfield, the CEO of Fresh Tilled Soil. Anurag Verma with Thibaut DeVault, the growth marketer at Solid. Karen Landry, a product director at MindGrub Technologies. Carlos Gonzalez de Villa Umbrosia, the founder of Product School. Dan Ward, a two-time author and former officer in the military.
You still here? It's over.
Go home. Go.